Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth virtual event from the Masonic Library and Museum of Pennsylvania. I am live remotely instead of at the Masonic Temple at 1 North Broad Street. My name is Lee Martin. I'm an associate with the Library and Museum. Attendees on Zoom will be muted, so please use the Zoom chat for any questions you have, and I'll respond to them after the presentation. So this won't be a comprehensive review, but we'll try to answer the question of how did Freemasonry go from this, operative stonemasons from the working classes, to this. This is King George VI on the left, Prince Arthur, the Duke of Connaught, his older brother, the Prince of Wales, the future Edward VII, and his son, Prince Albert, Duke of Clarence. And on the right is King Christian X of Denmark. So why did the aristocracy join Masonic lodges in the year following the formation of the premier Grand Lodge of England? During this presentation, I'll try to demonstrate that it was a direct result of the Masonic leadership using Freemasonry, not only as an institution of higher learning and fraternity, but also as a social network which supported the new government, which had come to power recently, and also to verifiably reject any notion that they were supporters of the previous administration. And a quick overview, the period of the First Grand Lodge was marked by the fall of the Stuart monarchy in England, with the death of the childless Queen Anne in 1714. The 1701 Act of Settlement, which banned Catholics from the monarchy, led to the coronation of her Protestant second cousin, the Prince and Elector of Hanover, who was crowned King George I in October of 1714. The coronation of the Protestant and German Elector of Hanover, who spoke no English, led to riots all across England, including London, as the Jacobites didn't recognize him as the rightful heir. George's coronation led to major conflicts with Catholics and Tories who wanted Anne's Catholic half-brother, James Francis Edward Stuart, for succession. So over the years, several Jacobite rebellions were pushed back, and at least 2 plots were uncovered by a prominent Freemason who was Under Secretary of State, Charles Delafaye, who was the government's chief anti-Jacobite spy master. There's a lot of history there I'm not unpacking, mostly because of the time we have, but if you're unfamiliar with this part of England's history, there are plenty of resources available online if you search for terms like James II, Jacobite, or Glorious Revolution. Suffice it to say that when the Whigs assumed the authority and George became king, the faction supporting James, the Pretender, did their best to usurp the government with a great deal of help from Spain, France, and Sweden. Around 1745, the attempts to restore the Stuarts to power had largely run its course. Here's a quick review of the 4 lodges that met in June of 1717 to establish a Grand Lodge just 3 years later, when Jacobism was a real threat. Rummer Lodge had the most membership, more than the other 3 combined, and it was the members of this lodge that were the ones calling for the creation of a Grand Lodge. Rummer was the most socially and politically connected lodge in London, driving this process of governing Freemasonry. Rummer was situated at an ideal location in Westminster to attract men of status, between the Royal Palace of St. James in the north and the offices of government and parliament to the south, and just a short walk from the Horse Guards, the headquarters of the army. Membership was mostly wealthy and Whig, and definitely not Tory, parliamentarians, army officers, aristocrats, and merchants. The members there used the participation of the other 3 lodges to create a Grand Lodge, which would become an organization that would promote new Whig, Hanoverian, and pro-Huguenot interests. Members of Rummer chose to create a Masonic organization that would appeal to the government. In the 1730s, Grand Lodge deliberately warranted lodges on the continent, for example, to assist the government in intelligence gathering. This isn't a comprehensive list, but I wanted to highlight these brethren. John Theophilus Desaguliers was a French-born polymath. He was a natural philosopher, clergyman, and engineer. He was elected to the Royal Society in 1714 as an experimental lecturer, sponsored by Isaac Newton. His family was among the thousands of Huguenots who fled France to escape religious persecution under Louis XIV and his 1685 Edict of Fontainebleau, which reversed the Edict of Nantes, which had allowed for religious plurality. Desaguliers studied at Oxford and later popularized Newtonian theories and their practical applications in public lectures, which were sponsored by the intellectual elite. He was the major player in organizing the intellectual and academic culture in Freemasonry and persuading intellectual gentry to become Freemasons. He initially joined the lodge that met at Goose and Gridiron. George Payne, who's not pictured, was one of the many magistrates or justices of the peace to join a lodge. Roughly a third of Horn Lodge was composed of magistrates. He was a dedicated Whig loyalist. He collaborated very closely with Desaguliers and collected the charges and regulations that were published in Anderson's constitutions. He was trusted with revising Anderson's constitutions in 1754. He spent most of his career in the tax office, rising through its ranks over the course of almost 40 years. It's not clear how he met Desaguliers, but Payne's office was a location of one of his scientific lectures, and they may have been neighbors in London. They collaborated in Grand Lodge for over 25 years. Charles Delafaye, also an Oxford graduate and Huguenot, had an impressive career in the diplomatic service. He was appointed Justice of the Peace for Westminster around 1714, serving as Under Secretary of State in several jurisdictions. One historian commented, quote, Charles Delafaye was one of the most highly trusted members of the English government, especially in all matters concerning Jacobites. As Under Secretary of State, he was responsible for foreign intelligence as well as domestic espionage. He was awarded Gentleman's Sewer to His Majesty in 1717 by the Duke of Shrewsbury, who was Lord Chamberlain, and Clerk of the Signet under the Lord Privy Seal in 1728. Most important, as a token of thanks, he received an honorary degree from Cambridge later that year, conferred by the King, along with 5 dukes and Sir Robert Walpole, the first British Prime Minister. He was elected Fellow of the Royal Society in 1725. Martin Fawkes, who's pictured there on the right, he was a member of Bedford Head Lodge, another influential lodge. He was a wealthy and well-connected son of a Solicitor General who was Attorney General to the Queen Catherine, wife of Charles II. After studying math at Cambridge, he was elected Fellow of the Royal Society along with Desaguliers in 1714, where they became close friends. He was a member of other prominent clubs like the Spalding Society and the Society of Antiquaries. He and Desaguliers actively recruited from these societies to join Masonic lodges. Now we start to see the peers. Montague was the first Grand Master from the peerage. He was one of the wealthiest men in Britain at the time, with close ties to the government and the king. This was a serious win for the fraternity. His membership launched a new era for Grand Lodge in that there's dramatic increase in press coverage of Masonic activities of this period, which also mentioned other prominent members. Think of 2011, the press coverage surrounding the announcements of Richard Dreyfuss and Shaquille O'Neal and their memberships. Since this was essentially free advertising, more and more important men and those who wanted to be important, like the flourishing middle class, petitioned for membership. Annual meetings had to be moved to larger venues to accommodate a dramatically growing membership as a result. In 1717, Montague was admitted a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians. He was made a Knight of the Garter in 1719 and was made Order of the Bath. And it was after his term as Grand Master that he became a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1725. The Duke of Richmond was a very close friend of Martin Fawkes and a prominent Whig aristocrat, a prominent member of Horn Lodge, and it was largely because of his influence and that of Desaguliers that Montague was persuaded to join and become Grand Master. While joining earlier than Montague, he wasn't Grand Master until 1724, the same year he was admitted a Fellow of the Royal Society. I'm skipping over Montague's successor, the Duke of Wharton, as well as his successor, the Earl of Dalkeith, because of time, but here's a list of premier Grand Lodge Grand Masters. All of them after 1721 are nobility. You'll notice some bolded text referring to the first royal member in 1737. The eldest son of George II, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Frederick Lewis, the first royal initiated. There were several of his staff, military officers and peers, including Richmond, who were given royal appointments by him, which led to him joining. His Royal Highness was initiated in an occasional lodge presided over by de Zagoulier in 1737 in Kew. The prince was made both an entered apprentice and a fellowcraft at the lodge, which was customary in this period, receiving his master mason degree a month later. In 1738, he was master of a lodge, and Dr. Anderson published a dedication to him that year in his second edition of the Constitutions. There's no better way to legitimize Freemasonry as a vital organization, and the attention in the press was significant. Now, he died before his father after an injury, so the crown actually passed to Frederick's son, who became George III. These images are from the second edition of Anderson's Constitutions of 1738, which is in our rare book library holdings at the Masonic Temple. On the left is the title page, and on the right, the first of a 3-page dedication to the Prince of Wales. The text is rather elaborate, complimentary, and flowery. I really like the engraving at the top of this page. That's a stylized badge of the Prince of Wales at the top with working tools, Masonic working tools. And note that crown at the top there. We'll see that again later. You know, it's only fair to mention the principal competition for the Premier Grand Lodge, the so-called Grand Lodge of the Ancients, created by disaffected Irish and provincial Englishmen Masons who were being denied admission to London lodges. They did rather well, also attracting the attention of the gentry, mostly with Scottish or Irish holdings. Prince Edward at the bottom of the list is a brother of George IV, who was chosen to help with the merger efforts, which started in 1811, along with his brother, the Duke of Sussex, who became Grand Master of the Premier Grand Lodge. Sussex became the first Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England. There's Sussex at the top with the 6th son of George III, one of George IV's brothers. Half of these guys are royal, the rest are peers of the realm. There's a star at number 4 for Edward VII, the eldest son of Queen Victoria. I'll chat more about him later. This list of royals is incomprehensive, but it shows that Freemasonry had the sort of status that attracted men in the English royal family. Also not listed are the illegitimate descendants of Charles II who joined, including the Dukes of Richmond and St. Albans, and the Earls of Dalkeith, De Lorraine, and Lichfield. The next few slides will continue the list, so I'll just let you read them over briefly. So their majesties, who were previously Grand Masters as Princes of Wales, surrendered the office of Grand Master after they were coronated. And these are the current royal members. The Queen's cousin, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, Grand Master of United Grand Lodge of England for almost 54 years. His brother, Prince Michael of Kent, Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons, and he's also Provincial Grand Master of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Middlesex. And of course, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip became a Mason in Navy Lodge in number 2612 in London in 1953, the same year his wife, Her Majesty the Queen, was crowned. We have several items in our collection with ties to the royal family, so let's take a look at them now. This is an ornate setting maul made of brass, turned ivory, and amboina wood. Amboina is a type of decorative wood that makes quite the impression when it's polished. If you're not familiar with it, the setting maul is used in operative construction to move heavy stone. And in English lodges, it functions as an officer's emblem and has different ritual uses. There's that crown on the top and the thistle are important clues to its possible origin and where it was used. This is a ceremonial level also made of amboina and brass. The missing piece, the bob that would appear there in the lower center, would have been made of ivory. Sometime soon, this will go to a conservator. Ichdian and the feathers at the top are the badge of the Prince of Wales. It translates to I serve, which is the motto of the Prince of Wales. And there are monograms of Princess of Wales, Alexandra, in the lower left, and her husband, Prince of Wales, Albert Edward. In the middle, Resurgat in Gloria, Rise Again in Glory, is the motto of the University of Glasgow. And the thistle artwork is the same as we find on the mall. So with those clues, we were able to find this nice article talking about their creation and use. They were part of a set made in London. On October 8th, 1868 in Glasgow, there was a royal cornerstone laying ceremony for the new University of Glasgow building. He wasn't a Mason yet, but while Prince of Wales, Albert pioneered the idea of royal public appearances as they're understood today. He participated at several opening events, including the opening of the Thames Embankment in 1871 and Tower Bridge in 1894. We don't have the trowels in our collection, but I'd love to find out where they are. They might be at Holyrood or Balmoral or another royal property. In the museum's first accession book, we see the entries by the first librarian and curator of the museum, Julius Sashi, who made a grand tour of Britain and the continent, purchasing Masonic items for the collection, as the museum had been recently established by a generous donation from Philadelphia businessman John Wanamaker. The note used in laying cornerstones P of Wales would lead you to believe that the items we have are authentic, but there are two clear indicators that suggest that what we have are museum quality reproductions. First, the price is just £5. In today's money, that's around $200. If these were genuine, they'd be much more expensive and probably not sold by a retailer in Glasgow. Also, secondly, items created for royal use are almost always added to the royal collection unless they're donated, usually to a museum or a school. The royal collection is massive, consisting of at least 1 million items collected over the past 300 years or so. However, only a fraction of their database is publicly searchable. Our curator contacts in London, Glasgow, and Edinburgh had never seen these before when I showed them to them, and they were really impressed, but they all directed me to the royal collection. So hopefully I'll hear from them soon. This is a mezzotin portrait created when the Prince of Wales was Grand Master. In our collection, we have a large color portrait similar to this image, framed and displayed near the 4th floor offices. He was Prince of Wales from 1841 to 1901. On December 20th, 1868, he was made a Mason in the Swedish Grand Master's Lodge in the Royal Palace at Stockholm by Charles V, King of Sweden and Norway. And that was just 10 weeks after that Glasgow cornerstone ceremony. In December of 1869, Edward was invested as honorary past Grand Master at Freemasons Hall, London. The man by the chair there is the Grand Master at the time, the Earl of Zetland, and His Royal Highness is just to the right of him with his hand on the apron. Note the size of that Grand Master's chair. That was originally built for the rather fluffy George IV when he was Grand Master, and it's on display at the Museum of Freemasonry in London. Wales was Grand Master of United Grand Lodge of England from 1874 to 1901. He's there seated. Some press commemorating his installation as Grand Master in 1874. This is obviously an artist's rendering. After his mother's passing, he becomes king on January 22nd, 1901. and his younger brother, Prince Arthur, takes his place as Grand Master. In front of the altar there is Sir Robert W. Woods. He was Grand Director of Ceremonies. Now, in addition to the setting mall and the level, we have this badge with the Prince of Wales emblem on top of it, and it's currently on display with the setting mall, along with several other pieces associated with the Grand Masters of United Grand Lodge of England, including a collar jewel, and when it was worn, it would have been attached to this chain collar, worn along with this rather impressive apron, which would have been worn by the Grand Master, identical to the one the Prince wore, and also all subsequent Grand Masters. So that concludes this presentation. Thanks very much for attending. And if you'd like this list, please feel free to reach out to us. Well, please join us for our next presentation. Thanks very much to the FOS people listed here and their cooperation in getting this together. I'd like to call out Michael Comfort as well for helping with some of the photography that you saw. Thanks for joining. Hope to see you again soon.